What's a fake fact that you believed for a long time? That fish would get scared and swim away if you talked while fishing. Turns out my dad just wanted me to shut up. Wait, really? Yeah, I read an article in a French magazine and they tested to see if it made a difference. I don't remember the specifics because it's been a few years, but the conclusion was that the fish didn't care if you were talking. Loud noises like banging the hull of your boat would scare them away though. I was homeschooled up until the 6th grade. Every time my family ever drove past cows, Dad would point at them and say, "Oh look, American short-necked giraffes." 6th grade rolls around and I smugly correct the teacher in class, saying she should use the proper name, American short-necked giraffe. I was incorrect. Thanks a lot, Dad. When I was a kid, I thought all the photos that barbers hung up of their kids at their stations were pictures of their best customers. I would always try to be as still as possible while they were cutting my hair in hopes of getting my picture taken. Semi-related, but I used to sit really still in the car and try to blink as little as possible to convince people driving by that I was a garden statue, so they'd think my mom was weird for buckling a statue in a car seat. I've done the same thing, hoping and believing a little that people would think that maybe my parents just had a really realistic figure of a child in the front seat. My mom for years convinced me that any black or purple colored sweets were horrible and that I didn't like them. I do like them. They were just her favorites. Also, for about 5 years, she told me she was 28. My brother once told me that the white/clear gummy bears were actually drugs and that I shouldn't eat them. I was probably 6 or 7. I was also puzzled by the existence of drugstores because drugs are bad and illegal. In my country, drug is never used to mean medicine, and I wondered why they were allowed if it was known they sold drugs. Can confirm, I thought the same. We call drugstores chemists in New Zealand. Same with gas stations. I always got confused because you get petrol, which is a liquid, not a gas. Took me way too long to realize the word spawned from the word gasoline. Dad replaced my dead goldfish with a betta fish and told me that the goldfish turned into betta fish instead of telling me the damn fish died. Hey son, you know your goldfish was feeling ill? Well, he got beta. When I was a kid, my mom told me that if you drove with the interior lights on, you would get pulled over and given a ticket, or if you honked the horn. My mom told me that if the car went over 70, it would explode. I believed her until I started driving and had to explain to my impatient friends why I couldn't go any faster. That bumblebees shouldn't be able to fly, but do. I thought that Lennon and Lenin were the same person for years, certainly until high school. I blame my parents for this, who talked about both in our house, so I didn't see their names written down. The tasting map of the tongue. In fairness, everyone believed it at the time, so I don't know if that counts. I remember being taught it in school in the early 1990s. I've just read, and apparently it was discredited in the 1970s, but I was being taught it in the mid-2000s. When I was a kid, swallowing gum will mean it stays in your stomach for 7 years. My sister believed until she was a full-blown adult that Alaska was an island because on maps that display the United States, it's always separated from Hawaii. Fun fact, my sister is now a very well-educated 6th grade teacher and has vowed that she will prevent future absurdities of this nature. That reindeer were mythical. I had only ever heard them in the context of Santa and the other Christmas creatures, so I just assumed they were fake too. I thought males can only release sperm 2 times in their entire lifetime, because of the 2 balls. Man, was I wrong. My father somehow convinced me that the brown UPS delivery trucks were called broccoli trucks. No, they didn't deliver broccoli, they delivered packages. No, they were not associated with broccoli in any way at all. So why were they called broccoli trucks? Damned if I know. Dad logic. I learned the truth about things far later than I should have. In middle school, actually, when I offhandedly remarked that I'd seen a broccoli truck in the parking lot, my teacher overheard me and asked me to point it out, then gave me a look of skeptical confusion when I indicated the UPS truck. That was the moment when I realized my dad might have made up the whole broccoli truck bit. I wound up trying to explain that it was a family tradition to refer to delivery vehicles by odd names, but everything I said only seemed to make my teacher grow more suspicious. Upon hearing the story from me, my father did a very poor job of restraining his laughter. My mom convinced me and my sibling that ice cream trucks were actually just music trucks. They go around the neighborhoods in the summer playing music for everyone to hear. Isn't that delightful? Until my aunt offered to buy us ice cream from the truck one day while she was watching us and blew my mom's cover. We never asked to buy ice cream before then, but now we knew. When my parents got home, we were excited to tell them that the music truck sells ice cream too. My parents told my brother and I that the music on the ice cream trucks only played when they were sold out. They just didn't want kids to waste their time running to an empty truck, hence the music. Deoxygenated blood is blue. My teacher couldn't convince us because she was really rude in explaining it. Oh dang, did we have the same teacher? Mine asked which color deoxygenated blood is, and I piped up and said blue. Then she said only people that don't know anything about science would believe something like that. How was I supposed to know? We were only in the 6th grade. My face got really red and I didn't say anything in that class for the rest of the year. Komodo dragons have septic bites. Turns out they're just venomous. Lame. Sharks don't get cancer. Well, they do. Cancer doesn't discriminate. To be fair, when that was being said, there were not any recorded cases of shark cancer. I literally thought goats were boys and sheep were girls until about 3 months ago. I'm 33. That you could see the Great Wall of China from space. I mean, with satellites I can see my house from space, so it's not completely false. Bonsai Kitten. For those of you unfamiliar, there was a website called Bonsai Kitten that photoshopped cats into strange-shaped jars and containers. The site stated that they put them in as kittens, and their bodies grew into the shapes of the container due to the confined space that they were trapped in. This is the earliest example of internet trolling that I fell for. I reported the site to PETA, which I also believed in, and posted it to all of my friends on MySpace to try and get the horrible monsters behind the service brought to justice. After a few months, I learned that it was a fake site created just to cause shock value, and I never once believed another thing I saw on the internet at face value. It honestly shaped the way I perceive the world through the internet. Never again will I actually believe something without well-documented sources, and even with sources, I remain skeptical. You swallow 8 spiders per year. That cracking your knuckles was somehow bad for your joints and could lead to arthritis. Turns out my grandma just thought it was annoying. That's not just your grandma. That was a pretty commonly believed thing for a while. I still hear plenty of people say that. When I was a kid, I thought the help wanted signs in the store windows were encouraging us to provide aid to outlaws. I thought the no minors sign on the liquor store window meant that minors couldn't come in because they were dirty and or wasted. I was horrified to see a whites only sign on a tennis court fence. For way too long, I thought that drinking and driving literally meant drinking any kind of beverage while driving. I thought my dad was constantly breaking the law while driving and drinking soda. My cousin told me that if you swallowed a watermelon seed, you would have watermelons grow inside of you, and you would die if they got too big. That freaked me out for the longest time, and I refused to eat watermelons. That there was this one person I'm destined to be with. The sky was blue because it was reflecting the ocean. When I was little, I thought that whenever a song was on the radio, that singer was in the studio singing it live at that exact time. I thought that too. I would always get confused when a song would play on 2 stations at once, so I assumed that there were 2 different microphones, one for each station. That the giant turkey legs you get at the Renaissance Fair were actually eagle legs, since turkeys don't grow that big. Someone told me that, and I believed it for years, until I got curious and decided to Google it. Turns out I didn't even have my fake fact right. The original made-up story claimed that they were emu legs, but in actuality, they are just turkey. Using only 10% of my brain. In elementary school, some kid told me if I don't take a crap at least once a day, then my body will explode. When I was younger, the concept of electricity was extremely difficult for me. Up until the age of maybe 10 or 11, I thought that electricity was just some made-up word adults used for things they didn't understand. I thought there was an entire species of little people that actually were the brains behind this electricity thing. There was a little man inside my pencil sharpener that would manually sharpen my pencil with his knife. The same went for traffic lights, a little person in there switching the lights. Cars, washing machines, everything had a factory inside of them of little people doing everything by hand. I thought chameleons changed color as camouflage. They change color according to temperature and other factors. My entire life is a lie. Camouflage is still part of it, just not the only or even the main part. That I would get sick if my feet got too cold or wet. I thought my grandma knew everything, so even after I learned about the immune system, I still believed her. Eventually, I put 2 and 2 together, but it took me longer than I care to admit. Columbus was a cool guy. I'm half Native American, and I had a friend in kindergarten who was also half Native American, so of course our parents let us in on the secret when they found out we were learning about him. Apparently, my friend and I found a book with cut-in-half Native Americans and went to the front of the class, opened to the said page with the dead Indians, and said, "Look what they did to us," in front of about 25-year-olds. So about at least 20 children were aware that Columbus was not a cool guy. Haha. When we were kids, my parents would drive us from California to Utah to visit relatives. I was 6, my brother was 5. One time we approached the California border, there was a checkpoint where you had to stop. They would ask if you had any fruit in your car. My parents always told us it was a checkpoint where they confiscated children, so we'd sit in the back seat under a blanket fearing for our lives. I kinda love my parents for this cruel and unusual trick. Until my late teenage years, I thought the forefathers were the four fathers, as in the ones on Mount Rushmore. That urine is sterile. Once I became a nurse and thought about it, duh, of course it isn't. Also, that going out in the cold with wet hair can make you sick. American interstate highways by law are required to have sections of a dead straightaway with no overpasses at prescribed intervals so they can be used to land fighter jets. It's true that the interstate highways were built as a defense imperative. Their full name is the National System of Interstate and Defense Highways. But there are a lot of bad urban legends out there about fighter jets landing on them, and there being laws tailoring the design to accommodate that mission. It's simply not true. I'm Swedish, and we have some parts of the highways built to be able to be used as an airbase in case of war. I just believed that every country did that, and it made so much sense for America to do such a thing. And now the USA doesn't? Pineapples were a subterranean fruit, with only the green leaves protruding from the surface, like a carrot. Until way later than I'd like to admit, I believed if I watched too much TV, my pupils would turn into squares. Thanks, Mom. I grew up in Hawaii, and when I asked my dad where the black sand came from, he told me about underwater dynamite explosions. What a dumb thing to tell a kid. It actually comes from the volcanic activity on the Big Island. I just recently learned that craisins aren't just crazy raisins, they're cranberry raisins. They also don't make muffin tops by cutting the tops off of muffins and throwing the bottoms out. I'm 21. That it's illegal to pick your state's official flower. Here in California, a lot of people believe it's against the law to pick California poppies. It's not. They're wildflowers, which is one notch above weeds. I thought the black market was like a bazaar, with folding tables and chairs with people trying to sell illegal goods. I loved history, especially Rome, when I was a kid and was well into Age of Empires, etc. Was also kind of a picky eater and refused to eat tomatoes one time, so my dad told me that if I were Roman, I'd have to eat tomatoes because the ancient Romans ate them all the time. I believed him and got them down, and gradually got over my thing with tomatoes. It wasn't until years later that I found out why that wasn't possible, but I think it was a good call. Dad also got me to eat mushrooms one time by telling me the Vikings always ate them before battles, which I guess might be a little true. A group of raccoons is called a business. That drop bears exist. Damn you, the Australian tradition of making things up as a culture. Drop bears do exist. The myth is that they don't. And the history behind that is actually incredibly ironic. Drop bears, as every Australian knows, fall somewhere between pest and predator on the list of their many faunas. While they mainly stay in trees outside of city limits, there are frequent reports of them appearing in populated areas, and the damage they can do when dropping onto unsuspecting passerby, hence their name, is potentially devastating. In order to combat this, and to increase tourism, the Australian government commissioned the creation of drop bear repellent. After the product first became available, a few different companies started marketing their own varieties, and one advertising attempt stipulated that after using their repellent, customers would come to believe that drop bears weren't real. As it happened, the spray was incredibly effective, and many tourists left the country without ever having seen a drop bear. It spawned a rumor that the repellent was a tongue-in-cheek method of fleecing foreigners. With Australian national pride being what it is, the claim that drop bears didn't exist became a countrywide meme of sorts. It got a little bit out of control. Nowadays, there are actually teams of people devoted to perpetuating the myth that drop bears aren't real. If you search on Wikipedia, for instance, you'll often see that their article has been altered to list the species as fictitious, and it's actually a felony to photograph them. Granted, there's that excuse that flashbulbs were damaging to their eyes somehow, but the law remains unchanged in the digital era. As a result, most of the world genuinely believes that drop bears don't exist. At least it means that the repellent works, if nothing else. That yawning while you were sick was bad for you. Whenever I was feeling bad, I would make sure to hide my yawns from my mom. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure why I originally even got that idea in my head. Cuban cigars are illegal in the US because they have weed in them. If your teacher doesn't show up after 15 minutes, you are allowed to leave. Growing up in Virginia, my 4th grade teacher tried to tactfully explain the state's namesake by lying and saying that a virgin is someone who's never been married. That summer, while standing over his dead sister's grave, I asked my crying grandpa if his younger sister died a virgin. Reverse pandas. I read a book once that turned out to be totally false, and it basically said pandas reverse colors when they're struck by lightning. I got in a shouting match at work about it. I would be able to do whatever I wanted when I grew up. I thought Jean-Paul Gaultier invented the JPEG for years. That if you sneeze with your eyes open, they'll pop out of your head. I used to believe the tongue map was real because I saw it in a health book. I would always try to put candy on different parts of my tongue to test it out. A duck's quack doesn't echo. That microwaves heat your food from the inside out. Apparently not, and it took until college until I realized. I believed that everything used to be black and white. Where do I begin? The Earth is only about 6,000 to 10,000 years old. It's actually about 4,500,000,000 years old. The pyramids were built by Hebrew slaves. In reality, the Egyptians didn't rely much on slave labor at all, and there's no evidence to suggest that Hebrews made up any significant portion of slaves in Egypt during that time. There is scientific proof that a worldwide flood occurred in Earth's history. No such evidence exists. Explorers found what they believed to be the remains of Noah's Ark on a mountain. It was the remnants of an ancient boat, but nowhere near big enough to be the Ark of myth, and not even from the correct historical cultural region. It was likely an old boat that someone disassembled and used its parts to build a shelter. You can't create something from nothing. This argument only stems from a fractal misunderstanding of the term nothing, which corrupts your ability to comprehend the concept from the ground up. Life cannot be created from scratch. Turns out it's actually quite simple, but the results would take millions of years to manifest. So it's not something you can just do in a high school science fair. The basic building blocks of life are easy enough to find, and it doesn't take much to get the process going. It's evolution. So it just takes a prolonged trial and error. And by prolonged, I mean millions of years. It wasn't until last week that I found out you can balance eggs any time of the year, not just equinoxes. My dad had a mustache in his wedding photos. He told me it was his fake mustache for formal events. Why would I not believe him? I'm 4 years older than my sister, and when I was 8, I told her that sweat was actually urine coming through your skin. That's why it smelled bad and tasted funny. My sister believed this, and would even tell others this until about 12 years old when she was called out about it. She came home and hated me for about a week. She cried. It is great being an older brother. That Obama was a Muslim. It's interesting because whenever I said this, people thought I didn't like him because of it. I've always liked Obama, and I would even point to him as an example that not all Muslims were bad. So many of these facts are just made up by adults to get kids to shut up. That American women get paid less than American men for the same job. That it is illegal in the US to kill a praying mantis. That I couldn't play Nintendo 64 on the big screen TV because it would ruin the screen. Believed it for my whole childhood. Turns out my parents just didn't want me to monopolize the big screen. Organic food is healthier and/or tastes better. When I was a child, I would see black and white movies and assume that it took a while for humanity to invent color, and before then the world was black and white. That Pluto was a planet. That glass is a slow-moving liquid, told by my high school science teacher. Vaccinations caused autism. Thanks for that one, Dad. I thought Hitler was a transparent ghost guy for a long time when I was a kid. I don't know where I picked that up. When I was a kid and watched a TV show that began with "viewer discretion is advised," I thought it meant that I had to be discreet when and if I ever told anyone I had watched it. That palm trees aren't trees. They are actually bushes. That camels store water in their humps. Nope. Cow tipping isn't a thing people do. Always thought that that's just what some people did, but found out it's almost impossible. My mother was fine with every ethnic type except the Irish. She absolutely despised them. I'm not too sure how old I was, late teens or early 20s, when one day it dawned on me, wait, the Irish simply can't be all that bad. That doesn't make even logical sense. reading in dim light damages your eyes. It doesn't. It doesn't damage your eyes, but it sure as hell is nicer reading with good light. My stepdad convinced me when I was like 5 or 6 that the traffic lights were controlled by a guy in a room with hundreds of monitors. Didn't figure it out until I was 11. That burnt popcorn cleans your teeth. Turns out my dad just didn't want to eat the burnt pieces at the bottom of the microwave bag of popcorn. When I was a kid, my mom would take me to a mom and pop store down the street from our house. They had a sign in the window that said, "We card anyone under 18." But I only saw the "we card" part and thought it was an actual card. My mom went in there once and I was left with my older sister in the car, and before she left to go, I asked her to get me a "we card." It was many years later before I learned what it actually meant. My mom never made any attempt to stifle her laughter at me. I thought people had a piece of brain in their little toe for way too long. I thought it was like just in case your brain got messed up, you'd still have some brain stored in your pinky toe, just in case. My father is a programmer and mathematician. At some point in my childhood, he explained to me that pi in base 11 contains an enormous series of ones and zeros, which when arranged in a matrix will create a perfect circle. This was my go-to interesting fact for many, many years. I recently brought it up to him again and he just stared at me dumbfounded. As it turns out, my interesting fact is actually the end of Carl Sagan's Contact. When I was a child, I was made to believe that if and when I say bad words, even under my breath, invisible frogs, bugs, and other freaky things will come out of my mouth, and they will fill up the house, even when I can't see them. Can't think of one for myself, but this reminded me of something a friend told me. Her mom was Irish and her dad was Chinese, so they convinced her not only that she was Chirish, but also that Chireland was a real country that existed. If I recall correctly, she said she cried when her 3rd grade teacher had to break the news to her. Didn't last as long as some responses I've seen in this thread, but I feel that sheer ridiculousness of it all makes it worth sharing. That CNN stood for the Communist News Network, and the word chaos was actually an acronym for Christ has all our solutions. Yeah. Your brain does not heal itself. Was taught that in grade school. Late to the post, but I believed that there was a specially bred cow that had shorter legs on one side so they could stand on a hill without falling over. I was very gullible as a kid, but I used to share this fact with my friends in school. That all dogs were boys and all cats were girls. When I was 8, I was on the school council. Someone convinced me that another school had a roller coaster in its playground. I spent every single meeting putting forward my idea of having a roller coaster. Every meeting. They didn't let me stay on the council for next year. My dad told me he was an extra in Break-In 2, Electric Boogaloo. I then told all of my friends. I thought Americans had special powers. While watching Home Alone around age 5 or 6, during the scene where Kevin is controlling all of the cardboard cutouts with strings so it looked from the outside like there's a party with a lot of people, I asked my dad, "How can he do that?" My dad replied, "Because he's American. We're British." So from that moment on, for a good few years, I thought Americans were superhumans. My 23-year-old cousin was a single mother. She had a 5-year-old son that I watched occasionally when she worked and I was off. One day he lost a tooth. The next day when she brought him over, I asked if the tooth fairy had come for his tooth. He said no and hung his head. His mother says I told him the window was closed so she couldn't get in. I assumed she forgot and made up this excuse. It happens. The next day, I ask him. He hangs his head, no. My grown adult, 23-year-old cousin looks angry. She says we left the window open and she still didn't come. Then quietly adds if she doesn't come tonight, I'm just going to put money under his pillow myself. I somehow manage to keep a straight face as I send the boy out of the room to go watch television. Then I spend the next 20 minutes explaining to my able-to-drive and vote grown-up 23-year-old cousin that she is, in fact, the tooth fairy now. I decided to break Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny to her another time. That buying knockoff sunglasses can be bad for your eyes, as they're usually not UV coated, but cause your pupils to dilate, and thus cause more UV light to enter your retina. Turns out polycarbonate and most plastics filter UV light naturally. I've bought way too many expensive sunglasses because of this. Karma always catches up with people who do bad things. The truth is, plenty of people do bad things with little to no consequences. Cats have 9 lives. Boy, did I find out that I was wrong so many times. That you need to drink 8 glasses of water a day. Red cars go faster. that diamonds were rare. That I was allergic to pizza and ice cream. My mother told me that when I was very young, I had an allergy test done and it showed that I was allergic to dairy. It took me until I was about 30 to actually get tested for allergies on my own, and the test revealed that I wasn't allergic to dairy. I had my first piece of pizza at 30, and I gained about 50 pounds in 6 months, making up for the lost time. That the president runs America. Mosquitoes only like female blood. I see how that one came about. Only female mosquitoes suck blood. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have an example you'd like to give in the comments below, please feel free to do so. Then be sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you know when our next video is available. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time!